We're at Prime 93. I almost said Anthony's, but Prime 93 at the monthly meeting of the Military Officers Organization of America, Western Reserve Chapter. And we have a guest here we're going to talk with, or she's going to talk to us. And I've been trying to corral her for a good while, and finally I nabbed her. She came in the door. And this is Mrs. Dan Hahn, I might say Major General Dan Hahn. And she is going to tell us what it was like to be a military wife. And this should be interesting. Starting with General Hahn from leaving West Point as a second lieutenant and going all the way up to a major general, all the moves you had. And
we had a lot.
Yeah, I guess you did. And how did you cope with all this?
Well, we enjoyed it. I didn't know what I was getting into in the beginning. I mean, we started off, we were in high school together, and he went to West Point, and he came home, it was in middle of June of the year after we graduated from high school, and he said, oh, guess where I'm going? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I'm going to West Point. And I said, what's that? I had no idea what it was. And so I said, well, okay, well, when are you coming home? And he said, December. And I went, okay. so that was kind of my first foray into the military experience. So we stayed together off and on. Well, for the 4 years he was in school, and I went to Kent, and I graduated, and I taught a year of elementary school, and he went out to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, and then we got married the year later. And we drove my car all the way out to Seattle. Was our first assignment out at Fort Lewis. And I had no idea what to expect. And we pulled in, and one of his friends, one of his colleagues, he said, one of his other lieutenant buddies said, so we're going to the field tomorrow. And I said, what's the field? and at that point, you know, I didn't know anything about military life, and the good thing about military life is military families take care of military families, and I found that out right in the very beginning because I think he was the battery commander's wife. She came over the next day. She shook me down to get my ID card, showed me where the commissary was, and introduced me to all these things that I had, no idea about. So it kind of, it was a great introduction to the military life because here's this woman who I had no idea who she was, and she had no idea who I was, but there she was taking me all over this big base, trying to, get me my ID card, sending the paperwork out to him out into the field, and he was gone for a week, and so there I was in this town it was the first time I'd really been away from home, per se, so it was interesting.
They put you right into your basic training, so to speak.
Exactly, yeah. And then we were there for over 4 years, and right after our daughter was born, she was born in June, he left for Korea in September. So back then, when your husband went off to like an unaccompanied assignment, this family was, they just had to fend for themselves. So I took my 3-month-old child and went home and lived with my parents down in East Canton for the year he was gone. So that was an interesting experience. That first move was kind of interesting because, they showed up and I didn't know anything about moving, and they said, and they took some of the things, we were moving some of the baby furniture to my parents, but everything else was going into this big truck for storage, and I was like, they were just putting brooms and things just on this truck, and I thought, I'll never see that stuff again. But I found out later that the Army does a pretty good job of moving people. So after 20-some moves, I figured, and we only had one minor incident years later, but for the most part, our stuff all came intact usually. So.
What was it like as he moved up in grades?
Well, it was, there were different things. And, back in the very beginning, when we first back in the early, the late 70s, there wasn't any such thing like they have now as family support groups, organized family support groups. And so when your husband got promoted, there were extra little things that the spouses were And back then it was kind of like you were almost required to do those things. I know there were a couple times where he said that in some of his, his OERs, his officer evaluation reports, they would put a little note in there about, his wife is really helpful or whatever. Nowadays you can't do that.
You can't.
No, that is like way, you can't expect anybody to do anything. But back then it was, it wasn't expected of you, but I felt obligated to kind of help those coming up because I was helped out, at the very beginning. So I felt that, throughout the years that we were in the military, I didn't work. I mean, I worked part-time, but I never had a full-time job. So I kind of felt that the volunteering and taking care of my kids was kind of my job, basically.
Okay, how many children do you have?
We have 2 children. One was born out in Tacoma, and our son was born in St. Louis when my husband was teaching an ROTC assignment. And my daughter and her family, they have 2 kids, and they live in Athens, Ohio, and our son and his wife have 3 little boys, and they live out in Muncie, Indiana. So we're kind of in a good spot here because we're, 3 hours away from one, 4.5 hours away from the other. So we get to see him not quite as much as we would have liked, but it kind of brings to the head of the fact that when our kids were little, we moved to Germany, and for 3 years we never came back because you couldn't afford to fly back and forth then. And so I started thinking back how I would have felt, how my mother must have felt, and not seeing her grandkids for 3 years. So because I can't imagine not seeing my grandkids for 3 years, So.
Well, you moved 20 times. Well, you really had to get it right then. How did you get so organized?
Well, yeah, in the beginning it wasn't as easy as, the kids were, you'd tell the kids, okay, get your stuff together. And, a military move, the packers, they send the people in and they just start packing up. So in the beginning, after a while you learn that if you want to make sure things are together when you unpack them, that you need to put them in piles and organize.
So you had to supervise, really.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and the funny story is it was like our second move, I guess. When my husband came back from Korea, we went to Fort Sill. And he wasn't around a lot during the moves because he would go to work and then I'd be home with the packers and the whatever. And so we had taken our daughter back to Ohio because she was like 2 years old. We had brought her back here, and then we were down in Oklahoma packing up. And we were just going to Kansas City, I guess it was. But anyhow, he came home. The packers came, they packed up stuff, and they left, and he came home from work, and he said, where's that stuff out that was in the garage? And I said, what stuff? They packed everything up. And, well, it was his field gear that he was supposed to turn in after the advanced course. And he was, panicking. And I said, well, you didn't tell me that this stuff didn't get packed. So that was kind of as it turned out, one of his other friends wasn't leaving right away. And so he turned in his field gear. And then when we got to our destination up in, I guess we were going to Leavenworth, I think. I don't remember. But anyhow, then we unpacked and had to send all that stuff back down to Lawton. So that this guy could turn it back in when it was time for him to move. So that was kind of one of those things we realized that, you have to be organized. Otherwise, you hear horror stories about people going overseas and they forget to pull out their passports or whatever, and their passports get packed up in their household goods, and they have to wait for another passport because they're not going to unpack you. So.
Now, how did your life change going from up into field grade officer?
Well,
major up?
Yeah. I would say, some of the responsibilities changed. I felt like you were kind of required to participate in family activities, but I always enjoyed it. I never felt that it was a chore. I enjoyed doing it, but over the years, when he was a battalion commander, we were over in Germany at the time, so that was when in the Desert Shield 90, when Desert Shield, Desert Storm came about. And so definitely when they went off to the desert, there were a lot more responsibilities for the families back, and we kind of had to hold down the fort. And we had that was the first, our first experience with, war and, being deployed to a dangerous location. And it was a lot of people's first experience. So there were a lot, then, at that point there was a lot of anxiety because people had no clue what to expect when they got
You had a lot
up
of
there.
support though, didn't you?
We did.
In
We
the
had,
military?
the military, right around that time in the late 80s, early 90s is when the military started with the whole family support groups. Now they call them family readiness groups because especially over in Europe, when you don't have your, you don't have any your relatives or anything close, your military family is your family. And back then they found out that they were mistakenly telling people that it was a family support group and we were going to take care of everybody. Well, you have to kind of take care of yourself at one point or another, but some of these young wives felt that, the military was supposed to do everything for them, So at that point, I had some young captains' wives at that time who their husbands were gone and they had these battery commands or company commands, and they kind of felt that, and I finally had to pull them aside and say, look, you can't do everything for them. You have to let them do some things because you have to take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Now,
that was one of the things I found out, that really one of the important things was kind of mentoring the younger at that point.
now, how about when he went to BG, Brigadier General?
Well,
Did your life change?
Well, I mean, we got bigger house, but
That was nice. I'll bet you.
yeah, we had bigger houses, but as far as that goes, you would find some of those generals' wives out there years ago who would kind of wear their husband's rank. And I came across a few of those growing up in the military, and I thought, if that comes, that's not going to be me, because, I'm not in charge. I'm just helping people. So but you do have a little bit more responsibility, but also when you say things, for better or worse, people kind of will listen a little bit more. So sometimes it helped. When we were over in Germany, one of the ladies was having an issue with her housing, and I called somebody and I said, look, this is not right. And so, she credits me for helping her, and I wasn't really sure about that, but I did what I could.
How about when he went up to Major General? He was really getting to the top of the... practically
at that point, it was the same way. I mean, really, you just have the same. We were over in Germany, and so you get asked to be advisors for different things. Advisor for the wives club, and it's just kind of people ask you that just because of who you are, who your spouse is. But they take your, you do have, after 30-some years or 20-some years, 30-some years, you have some institutional knowledge of things that you can help people. So, but yeah, I mean, it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it all. And the last 2 years we were in the Netherlands, and he was in a NATO assignment. So that was fun because we got to meet a lot of people from a lot of different countries and go to and at that point there were kind of perks with that job because we got to go to a lot of real fancy kind of dinners because he was the highest ranking American at that place. So that was kind of fun, going to all these fun things, and we had a driver that took us to the official functions kinds of things. So, which my husband didn't really like doing a lot of times, but his secretary insisted, and I said, that's good. We'll do that.
Well, it sounds like and looks like that you adjusted so well. You hear these stories about anxiety and PTSD and all that.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's my personality. I don't know. Our kids really adapted well, which was good because, sometimes your children have issues, but our kids seem to be they were regular teenagers, kind of growing up. And our daughter went to high school for her first 2 years over in Germany, and so they all adapted well, and they enjoyed it. My son played golf, so he got to play a lot of golf, and he got to play with some German guys, and he thought that was cool too. So they, the kids adapted well. So had it not been, had they not adapted well or whatever, who knows what would have happened. So, but yeah, I enjoyed my time in the military.
That's great. Now we know the rest of the story. We finally got you on. But the other day I ran into a gentleman I knew, and his son's West Point, and he's a captain now. He's been deployed to Afghanistan. He's up for major. Craig, how's your boy doing? He said that he's going to get out.
Yeah.
I says, go into the reserves. He's tired of 15-hour days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess, he's got 2 kids now, and he says he was constantly away from home.
Right.
That affects a guy, doesn't
Yes,
it? And the wife,
does.
too.
And ever since we started getting back into this whole, Gulf War, the Iraq War, Afghanistan thing, it really has. I mean, we were fortunate that my husband didn't start deploying until our kids were a lot older. But I can understand why somebody wouldn't want to be home with their 3- and 4-year-olds all the time when their husband is gone. I mean, there's been a lot of put out on these young soldiers right now, and I kind of understand the fact that, after being deployed 4 and 5 times,
Miss Hahn, the only thing I can say is that you were the steel magnolia, right? Hey, thank you for talking
You're
with
welcome.
us.
You're
And
welcome.
it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And we love to listen to you.